Welcome, everybody, to the Bleacher Brothers Sports Network. Robbie Lastella here, and we've got another edition of the Lastella Report back on our regular Tuesday evening slot, guys. It's been a busy couple of days in the AAC world and the FAU world of things. FAU basketball got back in action very quickly following the Memphis matchup. Had a Sunday afternoon tilt with Eastern Carolina, which they won. Now they're back in action tomorrow night against Charlotte for a game which, on paper it looks like one where FAU should win handily. But Halton Arena is always a raucous atmosphere for sure. So that'll be a game that the Owls have to get up for sure. We'll get into that here in just a little bit, but want to go in chronological order as we do. Talk about ECU upcoming, talk about ECU, which already happened. Then we'll talk about Charlotte. And then we'll touch on some FAU football news. Major staff switch up today was announced. So we'll get into all that here in the first half. And then in the back half, hang with us, folks, and we'll break down all of the AAC action so far, some highs, some lows so far during American Athletic Conference play. I mean, I'm biased as a former FAU student, FAU reporter. I think the AAC is a great conference. It doesn't stack up that way on paper, and I understand that. But there's some really good basketball, some really good talented players in this league, and the non-conference schedule for each of these teams is tough. I mean, outside of Memphis, nobody really wants to schedule an AAC team because if you lose that game, then it doesn't look good on your metrics. But at the end of the day, the AAC is good, and if more teams were able to schedule good games in the conference slate, it would make the conference better as a whole. So that's why I'm hoping, maybe we get a little A10 partnership in the scheduling world. Give everyone some extra games in conference play, because that'll make the AAC look a lot better than it does on paper. But getting into the FAU action of things, Owls bounce back from the near 30-point loss to Memphis at home. They lose that one 90-62. They go on the road and they get a big win, 78-76 over East Carolina from Williams Arena, or they call that Minges Coliseum now. Guess not, it's Williams Arena. But anyway, for FAU to get that bounce back win early in conference play, right? You drop 2 in a row to start conference play, and you're in a little bit of a dicey situation. All of a sudden, it's back against the wall. You don't want to go 3 in a row, because then all of a sudden it feels like the wheels are falling off a little bit. So very important for FAU to get that road victory, get things back on track. And I think that's why we potentially saw John Jacobs decide to make that lineup change for the first time this season. He's been very adamant about, not putting too much value whether somebody is a starting guard or coming off the bench. And that is understandable, right? I mean, the way this team plays, we've seen games where it's Caleb Glenn or Nico Moretti off the bench that's leading this team. But the thing about the starting lineup is that's kind of sets the momentum for the game, right? You come out of the gates. We saw against Memphis, FAU fell behind 14-2 in that one. And then in this game, it was a different story. FAU came out hot, and Trey Carroll over Matas Vokatitis in that starting lineup gave this team the offensive boost that they needed. And now, whether they continue that going forward, I don't know. Because the thing about it was, yes, it gave FAU the offensive bonus it needed in that one. A 15-2 run to start that game for FAU was huge, especially, AAC games are going to be dogfights, right? But if you can get that kill shot, as they call it, a 10-0 run or something of those sorts, early on in games, it'll help you massively, huge, humongous. So for FAU to have that, even though ECU came back, FAU had that early pad, and they never really surrendered the lead. It got close. I believe ECU may have tied it up, but ECU, I don't believe, ever took a substantial advantage in that one, and it helped FAU that big start. Now, where it hurt FAU a little bit, and this isn't Trey Carroll's fault, it's just the reality of the situation, the rebounding, right? You have a 7-footer out there consistently. Everyone's mindset about rebounds a little bit is going to be different. It's not going to be, you're kind of falling back a little bit at times, knowing, okay, yeah, I got Matas out there to go snag that board. And it hurt FAU a little bit not having him on the court as much as it did defensively. Offensively, now Trey Carroll gave FAU a huge spark, and that helped them. On the defensive end, for ECU to have 20-plus offensive rebounds, how many do they have in total? Trying to find it, excuse me. Eastern Carolina finished the game with 25 offensive rebounds, which that's a lot. And it translated into 25 second chance points for ECU. 27 second chance points for ECU. All of a sudden, a game that, take that away, should have been a blowout. It was almost a loss. I mean, the end of that game was heart attack city for the Owls. They couldn't get the ball in bounds, had the ball on the end of the other end of the court, and couldn't convert on a layup. Went out of bounds off a pass from Leland, and so that was a little bit of an unfortunate ending to the game, and it could have been avoided had the Owls, been a little bit cleaner on the glass. That's what you wanted to see in that one. And the main reason they didn't have that size advantage was, because they had Matas coming off the bench in a little bit of a lesser role. And that, to me, is also why John Jacobs wasn't ready to commit in the weekly press conference yet to Trey Carroll being a full-time member of that starting lineup just yet. I think it needs to be a matchup situation, right? You don't want to force anything. Now, we'll see whether or not matchups become, every game is a good matchup for Trey Carroll. We'll see. But, against Charlotte, a team that has struggled on the glass this season, it's another opportunity for Trey Carroll to be in that starting lineup and continue to build confidence, because he has scored 15 or more now in 5 out of 6 straight games. And if he can keep building on his confidence, keep getting better, I mean, he's shooting nearly 60% from the field. On top of that, nearly 40% from 3. I mean, I don't know what John Jacobs exactly was expecting from Trey Carroll when he first signed that contract. He sees this guy with this long, luscious hair. He's kind of a goofball a little bit, but he's a serious hooper now. I mean, I'm sure he always was, but we didn't get to see this in action, as much with the last 2 teams. But I mean, he's probably, over the last 6 games, been the Owls' best player far and away. And I don't think that's much of a stretch. I think that's just the reality of it. The only really down game he had was against Memphis, and he still had 9. It was really a down game for the team as a whole. I believe Caleb Glenn was the leading scorer in that one with 12. So I mean, it was just a quiet type of night. Caleb Glenn led with 12, Bob Miller with 10, and Trey with 9 in that one. So, to me, it seems like Trey got that confidence boost once again from being in that starting lineup after being, after a little bit of a struggle against Memphis. He's inserted the starting lineup, and his presence in that starting lineup in that early part of the game, in my opinion, was what led to that 15-2 run, and I think John Jacobs agrees. So, that begs the question: does Trey Carroll demand, not him personally, but does his play on the court demand being in the starting lineup? And I think it does at the moment in time. Now, if you see you're getting having trouble on the glass like he did against ECU, then maybe you sub a little bit earlier. Maybe you go with Trey and Matas instead of Trey and Baba. Maybe that's the lineup success. But Baba hasn't really slacked either. Struggled a little bit against on the glass against ECU, but you take his minutes away, and then you're kind of at a disadvantage as well with how much he brings to the table. So don't envy John Jacobs' job mixing and matching these lineups. Definitely is a bit difficult. That is something that I wouldn't want to do. But what I wanted to hear the most was that Trey and Matas, both of them, were okay with the roles. Obviously, Trey is going to be happy being in the starting lineup, but he said Matas handled it perfectly. And as a freshman, a guy who's coming here overseas for the first time, to have the ability to accept your role, and just you've been in the starting lineup the whole season, and then all of a sudden now you have to come off the bench. That could be bad for the psyche. It could be, potentially, but it's not. It's not, because Matas took that really well. And so I think going forward, with knowing that his mindset is okay about it, I think Trey's got to be in that starting lineup. And if you see rebounds or an issue early, then you can bring Matas off the bench right away and then go attack it that way. But something else that stood out to me in that ECU game was, against Memphis, it was a tough scoring effort for FAU. I mean, 5 of 31 from downtown against Memphis. That's not going to get the job done very often. But it was real tough for the guards. Ken Evans 3 of 8, Leland Walker 1 of 10, and Kiki Tandy 4 of 9. And to have Leland and Ken really have bounce back games against ECU, that was important. Ken Evans 6 of 11, 4 of 7 from downtown, 17 points on the night for Ken Evans. Leland Walker, on the other hand, 14 points, 5 rebounds, and 7 assists. He was stuffing the stat sheet. It's important to have these type of games, right? John Jacobs talks about everyone contributing in different ways, and it's great. I mean, Leland had that 4 steal game a couple nights ago, and that is important to helping a team win. But when a player can, impact the game in the score column, that's the most fun way to impact the game, right? And so for him for both of them to really have big games against ECU, early part of conference play, it's important for confidence, right? I mean, it hasn't been, the most glorious season so far for Ken Evans Jr., but that type of game is something that can unlock things for him. It's not like he's coming here unexperienced, never having done it before. He has built a pretty significant career at Jackson State. Is off a year where he averaged 18 a game on 40% shooting, 39% from beyond the arc. He's not that far off. He's shooting 34%, so that's down a little bit this year, but he's 35% from beyond the arc. He's only averaging 8.9 points per game, his lowest career total since 2021, where he averaged 8 points a game even for Jack State as a sophomore. This type of season he's been having isn't the normal for Ken Evans, and now that I think he's had this really impactful game where he hit that triple down the stretch, that arguably is one of the biggest shots of the season for FAU. Right, that was the last points they scored against East Carolina, ended up being all they needed, and that was a huge shot for him, and I think he has that extra boost of confidence now. Maybe he taps back in. There's been a little bit of maybe a disconnect of some sort between, right away, first year at a new school after spending 4 years out of place that meant a lot to you. It can be difficult. And so it's taken some time, but, I think this game against ECU is what we really can expect to see out of Ken Evans once he gets going, more consistently. I wouldn't want to be guards trying to face this FAU guard trio, this whole roster really, once we get to the AAC tournament. That's that experience side of it. It doesn't experience, you want it to mean that right away you're going to come in and you're going to have these guys who've played basketball before and there's going to be no issues and they just hoop and you win games and that's that. Doesn't always happen that way. But what experience gets you is when the times get tough, they have that wherewithal to rely on past experiences, and I think that's kind of going to be what we see here. These are veteran players. Leland's experienced, Ken's experienced, and Kiki's experienced. And as soon as that light flips, it might have already flipped for Ken with this performance against ECU. Leland's had a couple big games, so has Kiki. If all three of them can get going consistently, especially from beyond the arc, this team is dangerous. I mean, it's what we've been saying all year long. And, the thing that was interesting to me about the stat sheet in total was after shooting 5 of 31 from 3 against Memphis, they go 10 of 20 against East Carolina. And, that 50% from 3 is really, really good. And I like that they kind of gave the triple a little bit of a backseat approach. I mean, 31 attempts against Memphis, that's a lot, and he only made 5 of them. So why not dial it back a little bit, attack the basket, let's get Trey Carroll going a little bit on drives to the rim, attack underneath the post, and FAU did that, and it worked. And they also had that three-point shot to not rely on, but when they needed it, it was there. It was there in a big way, especially in that first half. FAU was lights out from 3, 50% from 3 for FAU against Eastern Carolina on the day. In the first half, 7 of 11. Second half, only 3 of 9, but they only shot it 9 times. And that just shows they were really attacking the basket. It worked. And so a lot of interesting stuff going on right now with FAU basketball. Headed to Charlotte. An interesting matchup with Charlotte. Former FAU center Giancarlo Rosato, second in points per game, third so far this season for Charlotte. And I really think, Charlotte struggled this season. Yeah, we'll acknowledge that. But they flipped the switch last year against the FAU in Halton Arena. It could happen again. Now, I'm not saying I don't want it to happen again or anything like that, but let's be real here. Road games in the AAC, they are no given. And Charlotte, Halton Arena, if that place is packed, it's a tough place to go and win a ball game. And so this matchup, on paper, FAU comes in 6.5-point favorites, and I think that's about correct. They should win this game by a few scores. Shouldn't be a blowout, but listen, Charlotte has had some struggles this season. Their offense overall, it's never, even under Ron Sanchez, that's one thing. But even during Aaron Fern last year, the offense wasn't the end-all, be-all. It was the defense. They were a suffocating team. They had guys who could put the ball in the rim, Igor Milicic, Lukai Patterson, Deshaun Jackson. They're all gone. And now it's Nick Graves, who, to his credit, has really stepped up this year, upping his points per game from 10 to 18, to 17 and a half, so basically 18. But he's been good. But a 47.5% effective field goal percentage, which you don't know that factors in the 3-pointers being worth 3 and compared to 2s being worth 2. And their EFG is 47.5%, 281 in the country, 281st in the country. And the reason that's a bit low is because their 3-point percentage is 29.1%, which is 325th in the country. Now, that plays into FAU's favor right there. We saw early on in that game when East Carolina had nothing going, the offensive rebounds didn't start yet. When they weren't making anything from beyond the arc, FAU was really limiting their interior options and forcing them to shoot that triple, and they weren't hitting. And Charlotte, like I said, they're at home. There's always the chance that they could go in there and then all of a sudden get hot. But I don't know necessarily if that will be the case. They've struggled pretty consistently from beyond the arc this season, and so. Charlotte also they have struggled on the offensive glass, and that is something that could open the door for a bounce back game for FAU. Charlotte offensive rebound on 26.7% of possessions. It's 271st in the country. So poor 3-point shooting from Charlotte, poor offensive rebounding. That's a recipe for success for FAU. Now they'll still have to capitalize on their 3-point shooting. Can't have a Memphis performance. Need more of an ECU performance, and definitely this is the game where if you're FAU, you need to bounce back on the glass. You need to be better. You need to take a team that has struggled. ECU, to their credit, they were very good on the offensive glass. Charlotte, they are not. And so this is a game where you're going to have to bounce back and dominate on the glass. Don't let Charlotte get hot from three. Don't let them find their confidence. Force them don't let them get into the interior. Contest them from three. Limit their opportunities. And I just don't think Charlotte's got enough in this game to outscore FAU if FAU's offense is doing what it's more than capable of. The real surprise, though, this season for Charlotte, obviously, as I mentioned, the offense isn't the end-all, be-all. But their defense has been what has been really Charlotte basketball, grit and grind. I mean, when I talked to Giancarlo Rosado back at the AAC meetings, I was like, obviously, we'd love to have you back here at FAU, but in terms of fits, I think that was a really good fit for G, and we're seeing that he's impacting that team heavily. Because that grit and grind mold, kind of like Memphis in the NBA, the Grizzlies have had that grit and grind since they had Tony Allen, Zach Randolph, those guys. And maybe that's a little bit of a bias for me. I don't know. But I do think that is their fit. And I think Giancarlo fit that as well. But so far this season hasn't been the case. Teams inside the perimeter this season against Charlotte, 56%. And they're only forcing a turnover on 14% of possessions, which is 339th in the country. And then they allow an offensive rebound on possessions, which is 264th in the country. So their perimeter defense has been solid. However, their interior defense, their interior rebounding, and their ability to get in the passing lanes has been poor. And if they can't force pressure against FAU's guards and let FAU's offense develop and do what it wants to do, it's not going to go good. I don't think it will go well for Charlotte. Now, it hasn't been all bad for 49ers. I've only touched on the negative so far. But offensively, they're a really sound team in terms of getting a shot. They get to their shot. They're able to run their offense, move the ball around pretty effectively. However, the conversion on those shots is where it comes a little bit of an issue. But they only turn it over on 13.9% of possessions. That's 15th in the country. That's very good. That is elite ball control for the 49ers. And then they also get to the free throw line a pretty significant amount. Their FTA/FGA rate, free throws attempted over field goals attempted, 48.6. That's fifth in the country. So they're getting to the line at a significant rate. They're attacking the rim. That's that Charlotte grit and grind, attack, grind, get down to the rim. And they're also converting on their opportunities, 75.3% from the line. It's good for 80th in the country. And so the key for FAU in this game, do not let Charlotte get to the line. Do not let them win this game with free throws. Force them to get going from beyond the arc. Yeah, you don't want to let them get going, but make them try. Limit their interior options. Don't let them draw fouls at the rim, and make that 29.1% three-point shooting percentage play a role in that one. And defensively for Charlotte, their biggest strength is their perimeter defense. They're holding teams to 30.1% from three, which is 56th in the country. So their perimeter defense is going to be good. They're led by a 6'3" guard, Nick Graves, who's really good on both ends of the court, averaging 17.5 points a game, as we mentioned. Giancarlo Rosado right behind him. This has been a team effort, really, or I wouldn't say a team effort now, not as much as FAU, but they do have four guys who have really been big contributors for this season. Nick Graves, 17.5 points per game. Bobby Braswell, 12.5 points per game. Giancarlo Rosado, 12.1 points per game. And Jay Sean Thomas, JUCO transfer, averaging 10.7 points per game. So, to me, this is a game where FAU wins handily. They should. I mean, handily being within 10, but still 6, 7, 8 points. Something along those lines where they're comfortable. Want to see them bounce back on the offensive glass against a team that hasn't been so good on the offensive glass this season, and want to see them continue to have a strong perimeter presence, but not overdoing it, right? But more what we saw against ECU, a balanced attack. And if they can cut the offensive rebounds down to 75%, only allow less than 10, I think they'll be in a good position against the 49ers. Tomorrow night, 7 p.m., Halton Arena, ESPN Plus. Tune in for that. We'll have you covered with a recap article as well. We'll talk with John Jacobs via Zoom tomorrow night after the game. So we'll have you covered over on the Nest for sure. For that one, make sure to tune in. Owls in action, 7 p.m., Halton Arena. Other FAU notes here before we take a little break here on the Bleacher Brothers Sports Network. As I mentioned, major coaching change on the staff for FAU. Rock Bellantoni, former defensive coordinator, fired, hired, rehired, all the good stuff last year, all that crazy nonsense. Sorry, Coach Rock had to go through that. That was just a wild situation. But, FAU opted to bring him back under Kitley. Originally, he was retained as the associate head coach, edge rushers coach, and also, he's very involved in the recruiting department. I mean, we've seen, you look at a guy like Wilkie Denaud, who came over from Auburn. That's a Rock guy. I mean, you obviously, I'm sure he had conversations with Herman and whoever else, but at the end of the day, that's a Rock guy, and so you're going to lose that with Rock with him leaving, but. Rock opts to go to Auburn, back at the school he came from to FAU. Obviously, it's spent some time at FAU before then. But Rock's back now at Auburn, leaves FAU after accepting that associate head coach role. I'm sure the contract wasn't finalized or whatnot, but congratulations to Coach Rock. I'm sure that's a little bit of a raise as well, going to Auburn. I know has one of his sons attends college somewhere in South Carolina, and a little bit of a reduced role should allow him to go and see the boys playing baseball. So I think congratulations, as I mentioned, and it's a tough loss for FAU, brutal. Rock's value is something that not many people fully grasp. I mean, I don't even really know the full impact of Rock Bellantoni, but he's a well-liked, well-respected guy. We'll start there in the South Florida community, and that's going to be tough to replace for the FAU recruiting department. Obviously, still some Florida ties on staff. You've got Devin Santana, who FAU played for FAU, was at Miami. He's the D-line coach. Chris Perkins is still around. He hasn't. There's been no announcement either way, whether he's retained or not. But he's still actively recruiting with Coach Kitley. So I'm gonna assume that he's gonna find his way back here sooner than later in an official capacity. But I would expect him to be back. And outside of that, though, it's DJ McCarthy, and that's it. Who's FAU's wide receivers coach now after coming over from Bethune-Cookman. So. Not a lot of Florida ties on staff at all, and now you lose Rock, who was really one of the kind of like the face almost of the outside of Kitley, obviously, of this FAU coaching staff a little bit. Now they're going to have to replace that, and I don't know how they do it. I mean, Rock was getting them really good value, I'm assuming. I mean, he was filling 3 positions, right? Associate head coach, edge rushers coach, and a recruiting role, which probably wasn't a part of the contract. It's just something he did. And so now, whether or not they try to fill that role in the recruiting department, I don't know. I do know they're going to have to hire an edge coach, and whether or not they promote somebody that's already on staff to associate head coach or get somebody else, there's going to be raises and money and stuff that goes into that. So tough loss for the FAU coaching staff. I'm not necessarily sure how they go about replacing that, but I think they'll be all right. Want to see, recruiting. Don't want to see that take a little bit of a downfall. Hasn't with Love or Beer or Skipper departing, but Rock's a huge piece of this staff, and can't let him leaving kind of take things off track. I'm sure Coach Kitley will have a game plan here for how he wants to attack the portal more and high school recruiting as well. He was out boots on the ground as well pretty recently yesterday in different high schools around the state. So I saw a lot of nice messages from high school coaches around the state. So making a good impression. However, Rock had those impressions built up over many years, so that's a tough loss, and we'll see how FAU goes about doing that recruiting role along with associate head coach and edge rushers. We'll take a look at that a few weeks down the line and see if any other moves have been made. But folks, thanks for hanging out here for the first half, talking all FAU Owls. We'll take a quick break right here on the Bleacher Brothers Sports Network. When we come back, talking some AAC highs, some AAC lows from the first week of conference play has come and gone already. Crazy how fast this basketball season is going to fly. Conference play is going to fly right on too. Sooner or later, we'll be in Fort Worth, Texas, covering the AAC tournament. But folks, hang around right here. We'll be right back. I don't know why I was locked on mute there. I clicked it, but thank you. Glad somebody caught that. Otherwise, we would have spent the last 30 minutes here on mute. But I do wanted to answer that question a little bit. I was mentioning on mute, but as I was mentioning, Coach Rock's son does one of his sons goes to school in South Carolina, and the kids up in Pennsylvania, the other kids playing baseball. So he's going to be a little bit closer to that, I'm sure. I don't know necessarily if he's getting a raise specifically. I know Auburn probably pays all their position coaches six figures. So it might be a little bit more of a raise, but I imagine he'd probably be getting that here as well. So I don't know specifically. I'm sure Jeff Love, Ryan Beer, Caitlin Skipper in the recruiting department for UCF, I'm sure they might be getting a little bit of a salary bump. But that's just that's kind of the thing. Ryan Beer, Caitlin Skipper, those are really young guys, and Jeff Love has worked his way back into collegiate football after a horrendous experience at Kansas where he almost was the scapegoat for some recruiting violations. That had nothing to do with him. I'm not going to get into that. Just Google Jeff Love Kansas if you want to hear about his story a little bit more. Can't really knock him for leaving it either. It's just kind of a situation. He gets to be a head recruiting guy at a power program. So tough losses, but FAU will rebound for sure. I like that they go out and get Taylor Brown, 5-year director of recruiting, 6-year actually. It's going to go on 7 if he stayed in 2025, but 6 years for Taylor Brown at Western Kentucky as the director of recruiting there. And they got some pretty good guys, familiar with Coach Kitley's style of players that he likes. So I do think they will be they'll be all right. I do think there's probably maybe 1-2 more additions to that recruiting side of things. But closing it out on FAU a little bit, want to touch on some AAC teams which to me have stood out so far during AAC play. Obviously Memphis. Memphis is Memphis. They've got some really talented guards, right? PJ Haggerty, Colby Rogers. Those guys are really good. Tyrese Hunter. I don't know. Tyrese Hunter may be the best. PJ Haggerty, though, it's one of the two. PJ Haggerty makes some crazy shots, but I think really what makes Memphis's team dangerous is their ability to rotate successfully between Musa Cease and Dane Danger. Both of those guys as big men in the AAC, that's tough. That's tough stuff. And then you got PJ Haggerty on top of that. Man, Memphis is going to be the team to beat for sure. I'm hoping, praying somehow, one of these other AAC teams kind of sneaks in there, maybe FAU, and wins that AAC tournament, just so we get 2 teams into March Madness, because I can safely say Memphis can lose the rest of their games and probably still get an at-large bid. So, but Memphis doesn't surprise me more than some of these teams that have started out quite well to AAC play. So I want to start with USF. Obviously, everything that went on with the passing of Amir Abdur-Rahim, just awful. And for them to really come out in conference play with a lot of energy and ready to go, comeback win against ECU, a dominating win against ECU at home. Didn't have to come back in that one. And the thing to me that's really scary about USF is they've got Kobe Knox coming off the bench. And he had 18 against ECU, 15, 6 of 6 from the field, 3 of 3 from downtown against Wichita. If he's able to give that off the bench for USF consistently, this team is dangerous. Now, I do want to see Kason Jennings get going a little bit. He's the guy, right? He came over from Kennesaw with Coach Rahim. And didn't play last year, took a red shirt, and this is his year. Like, he was supposed to have a really dominating year. Hasn't had that yet, but doesn't mean it can't happen. And so he had 3 and 6, 3.6 points in the first 2 games so far for USF. If he can get going alongside Knox off the bench, I mean, they already have Jameel Reynolds and Jaden Reed at the top. If they can get 2 more consistent double-figure scorers in Knox and Jennings consistently, watch out for USF. Watch out. Because Coach Fletcher, he's been an experienced assistant coach for quite a while. And now he's got a chance to lead this team during conference play. Keep an eye out, folks. Keep an eye out on the Bulls indeed. Rice, another team that surprised me. I mean, a lot of people want to knock off Rice and say, oh, it's Rice, yada, 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 yada. But Coach Rob Lanier comes in here after getting fired from SMU. I said this at the beginning of the season. Rice was my team to watch. And all of a sudden, now they're 2-0 in AAC play. They beat Tulsa 70-64 on the road. And then they beat Charlotte 68-55 at home. And the thing for Rice to me that really, really shined in against Tulsa, they had 7 players score 7 or more. And against Charlotte, they had 6 players score 8 or more. That's that type of diverse offense that FAU likes. That when FAU is most successful is when they're getting those types of performances like we saw against ECU. Now, still isn't perfect for Rice either. I think the biggest thing I want to see is Alem Hasanovic, their sharpshooter, get going. He was 2 of 11 from the field in their blowout win against Charlotte, and they still blew out Charlotte. If he can get going and be that sharpshooter for them, watch out for Rice too. And that's what I was saying when I first got on the air with you guys is, a lot of people, obviously Rice isn't a basketball powerhouse by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a fun storyline to follow. It's AAC basketball, right? It's a story of redemption. I mean, Rob Lanier was down. He had some success at SM. He wasn't the greatest, but he had them on the right path, and they can him just because they're moving up a conference. I mean, they didn't can Rhett Lashley when they moved up to the ACC, and that worked for them. And I'm sure old Andy Enfield will have some success with SMU as well. But the way that Rob Lanier was ousted from SMU, in my opinion, was wrong. And I do think him having success at Rice is some kind of justice from the world. I do. I guess I'm a nerd in that sense. I love basketball storylines like that. And I also like how Rice is doing it. They're not top heavy. They've got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys on the year averaging 8 or more. I mean, that's a team basketball mindset. That's where guys want to go and play. And I don't know if Rice is going to win the AAC. I don't know. But to have them be competitive in the AAC after last year and the year before, they were a bit of a laughing stock. That's awesome. It's just awesome. And I think that's what I enjoyed the most about talking to Rice at the AAC media days is they kind of they just had that, like, we don't care about the past. Like, they're excited. They were excited. They had that underdog mentality to them. And so far, it's been working for Rice. And I do think that is awesome. So I'm rooting for Rice. Call me crazy. But I do think Rice will ruffle some feathers here in the AAC. And another team that struggled in the non-con that's having a really nice start to conference play, Ron Hunter's squad, Tulane, the team that spent $35,000 minimum on all of their players per player, and that's minimum. I mean, I'm sure the big guys. The best player, Caleb Banks, is probably making a lot more than $35K over at Tulane. But Ron Hunter at AAC Media Days let me know that everybody on the team, minimum, including bench warmers, is making $35K minimum. So a lot of money go around there at Tulane. So they start to the season where they lost to multiple teams outside the top 200, outside near the 300s. That was scary moments for a lot of Tulane fans. I'm sure the donors were their pockets were hurting a little bit as they started. But so far in conference play, they've been getting all of their money's worth for sure. They got an 83-68 win over Charlotte and a 92-63 win over UTSA. And the star this season for Tulane has been Caleb Banks. 7 games where he scored 20 or more. Had 21 against Charlotte, 24 against UTSA. The Indiana transfer, who Mike Woodson absolutely misused, had him coming off the bench getting peanut minutes, and here he is leading the way for Tulane, a team that last year really should have been a lot better than they were, and now they rebuilt that roster a little bit. Coach Hunter was excited, said it was very similar to some of his Georgia Southern teams, which he had success with. And I'm interested to see now. They've got off to that hot start here in conference play. Can they keep it going? Now, Tulane's had some struggles recent seasons in conference play, and their fans. I see the messages. They're not ready to jump on board with the "we're back" mantra just yet. But hold on, folks. I do think Tulane's got one of the best players in the AAC, and Caleb Banks. The dude is a guy. And I don't know. He could potentially, in my opinion, have some argument to be a one and done and go to the NBA next year. I'm not an NBA scout, so I'll let the higher ups make that decision. But I think he'd be a fit in the NBA. But to me, what led Tulane to be successful in these past couple of games is the back-to-back really good performances alongside Caleb Banks from Rowan Brumbaugh, the Georgetown transfer who, in my opinion, I thought he would have been better than Caleb Banks coming into this season. I thought, his I believe his dad played football, or his grandpa, excuse me, played football at Tulane, so it was a bit of a homecoming for him, and he was excited to be back there. He's averaged 14 a game so far this season, but had 19 against Charlotte, 23 against UTSA. If he can keep that up alongside Banks, that's dangerous. But the key to this Tulane team finding their success, right, and being that team that could potentially make a run in the AAC tournament, it's going to be Greg Glenn, the big man transfer from Michigan, been on the team now 2 years. He's their piece. If they can get productive play from Greg alongside Caleb and Rowan, that's a big three if I've seen one in the AAC. Now, Greg's only averaging 9 a game, 23 and a half minutes, but I think he can be that guy. If they can figure out a way to get productive minutes from both Banks and Greg Glenn on the court at the same time together, watch out for Tulane. I'm saying watch out for all these teams, and I know not everyone can win the AAC, unfortunately. But that's just what I was saying. I think the AAC is a really, really good league, and if the other teams around the country help them, I'll give them a little help in the scheduling department. I do think the AAC would be a much more valued conference than it is. It's so tough to schedule as an AAC team. I feel awful for coaches a lot of times in the AAC. They're scheduling these games knowing if they lose 1 or 2, maybe 3, then they're all of a sudden win the tournament or bust, or win the AAC tournament or bust. And that's just tough. That is just tough. I mean, Memphis they ran that gauntlet of the schedule, but they had a lot of opportunities to bounce back. Sure, they have lost a couple more than they did. So credit to Memphis for really running that gauntlet of a schedule, but I need more AAC teams to have schedules like that. Obviously, they're not going to get the level of competition Memphis had. However, I do think more teams can get, if with an Atlantic 10 scheduling partnership, I think a lot of teams in the AAC have a chance to compete for an at-large bid. I do. If they can just find a way to build a conference-wide, consistent scheduling platform, that's impossible, I know. But if they can figure it out, I think the AAC really could be a special league. I do. And I know the Memphis fans, if there are any watching, are probably laughing and cackling at me saying the AAC is a good league. But I'll stand by it. I think it's a great basketball league, and it's just an unfortunate situation with the non-conference schedules. Now, closing it out here, folks, a couple minutes left. I do want to touch on some teams that, to me, are underperforming. Underperforming, maybe just not playing well. I don't know. My first team, Tulsa, 0-2 so far. They're in a dogfight right now with UTSA in the first half. The Roadrunners up 30-28. They've dropped 2 games so far in AAC play. Blowout loss to UAB on the road and lost to Rice at home. Tulsa on the year 6-9. Them and Charlotte are the only 2 teams in the AAC, UTSA as well, under 500. UTSA or Tulsa, Tulsa 6-9. Wow, that is a tough start. And it's a tough place to win. Tulsa is not an easy place to win. And I think Coach Conkle is I like his leader of men capabilities. I think he's a really good person, and I think he can rally a basketball team to be competitive and make a run at the AAC tournament and potentially beyond. And it's just not an easy place to put together a roster. And they're building up football right now over at Tulsa. We see them getting a GM and trying to get things right after a little bit of a down stretch. And basketball is there too, and they need money and they need to help. They lost some player. They lost their best player in the portal. Imagine if Tulsa had PJ Haggerty right now. I think they'd be a lot better than they are. And it's not over. It is not over by any stretch for Tulsa. They got hot, in that AAC tournament a little bit, won a game, and but I think for them to get going, a guy who I think is critical for them, Ian Schmeichel. I hope I'm saying the last name right. I was watching the highlights from Tulsa, their last two games, and he stood out to me. He also stood out to me because he's a freshman from Suncoast High School over here in Riviera Beach. But I think if he can get going, give them another score alongside their guys at the top, Keaston Willis, Isaiah Barnes, Dwan Odom, Tyson Archie, all those guys. If they can get one more, I think Tulsa will be a lot better off. I don't know if they've got enough in the tank to compete at the top of the AAC, but I think if he can get going, I think Tulsa will be a little bit better. And then the other team that's been surprising to me, two, but both of the teams in the Carolinas. Charlotte 0-2, ECU 0-2 so far in AAC play. And ECU's lost a lot of close games. We heard them talking about this on the broadcast a fair amount. They haven't lost a lot of games in blowout fashion. 2-point loss to FAU. 6-point loss to South Florida, 5-point loss to Gardner-Webb, 7-point loss to South Alabama, 7-point loss to South Carolina, 14-point loss to UNC Wilmington, and that's it. That's it. That's their only. They lost by. No, that's it. That's their only double-figure loss on the year, and so. I mean, that's tough sledding for Coach Schwartz. They've got some guys. C.J. Walker from UCF is one of the best veteran leaders in the AAC, in my opinion. Doesn't mean he's the best player. He's got a ton of experience, and that's just a tough beat. I don't know their answer. Their answer is better perimeter shooting. They're in the 20s on the year, one of the bottom teams in the country. If they can get better three-point shooting, and that doesn't have to be gaudy numbers, but if they can get better three-point shooting, maybe 5 more a game, I think ECU, all of a sudden, their record looks a lot better than it does. A lot better. Don't know what the answer is outside of that. They grabbed 25 offensive rebounds against FAU and still lost, which is just brutal. But, yeah. And then Charlotte, they've got to figure out the defensive side of things. The offense struggling is one thing, but they cannot be allowing teams to shoot near 60% from inside the perimeter, and they got to get in those passing lanes. Have to. If they can do those two things, I think Charlotte will be all right. Up that three-point percentage as well. But again, just like ECU, doesn't have to be gaudy. Just a couple more each game to get that offense flowing. I think both of these teams do have a chance to turn things around, but it's going to have to happen quick. You don't want to get deep into the weeds of AAC play and find yourself in a rut. It'll be hard to turn it around. And then the only other 0-2 team is Wichita State. They've had a tough matchup with Temple at home and Memphis. I think they will be all right. The thing with Wichita, though, that scares me is their hot start to the season was fueled a lot by Justin Hill, who he's kind of cooled off a little bit. And outside of that, Xavier Bell is not – he's good, really good player. I just don't know if the consistency's there. Need Xavier Bell and Justin Hill to be consistent more often for this Wichita State team. But that's a team you don't want to play in the AAC tournament at all. At all. So that's my highs and lows for you folks here on the Bleacher Brothers Sports Network for the AAC. We'll be back next week with some more. We'll see if any of the teams snap their 0-2 skid, or if we've got teams riding a major skid when we meet you next Tuesday. In AAC action tonight, UTSA up 9 at the half over Tulsa, 38-29. And Tulane UAB in a dogfight in the second half, 54-54 from Birmingham. That's a game and a half, folks. Go check that one out. ESPN Plus for you on both of those games. So make sure to go check that out, folks. Thanks for so much for taking some time to hang out with us here. Make sure to tune into FAU's game with Charlotte tomorrow, 7 p.m. on ESPN Plus. And make sure to stay tuned to FAU Owl's Nest for post-game coverage as well. We'll be talking with John Jacobs after the game. Folks, once again, thank you so much. I'm Robbie Lastella. For everyone at the Bleacher Brothers Sports Network, this has been the Lastella Report. We'll see you next time.